Greetings, everybody, and welcome once more to Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive back into Golarion, back into its ancient past, and learn about Ancient Osirion today? I am your host and guide, as usual, the Emperor here, Captain Dracovin. Welcome once more to everyone there. Please, before I guide you through time, space, and dimensions to Golarion, back into its past, make sure, give a little bit of a tip for me, and make sure you are subscribed over the YouTube side of things. And make sure you do all the algorithm things and leave a comment. What's your experience with our topic today, Ancient Osirion? Or would you want to have some adventures with it? The dead don't always remain restless, and these are some very ancient dead we're going to be talking about. Let's go. We have once again arrived in Golarion, back in the past, to learn of another ancient empire. Now, in videos past, I have discussed the Osirion people. Certainly speaking, you can go check out my original Osirion video to get an idea of how it is today. But we're going to be diving back in the first two ages of Osirion, in the true ancientest empire that it was. Today, Osirion can in a lot of ways date its history back to this time period, but it's a different beast in many ways. Now, there are some great sources. My best bet for suggesting sources is, of course, the Lost Kingdoms book. It gives the very good picture of what's going on. But the two Osirion, Legacy of Pharaohs book being one of them, and Land of Pharaohs being the other one, these two books also kind of do. There isn't a good second edition look at old Osirion. Modern Osirion, you can kind of get some of it from like the World Guide and stuff. But like when we're talking about old Osirion, there's been kind of some updates, but also kind of not updates. It's a little bit of mess because we'll have to talk about the Pantheon a little bit here because they're also kind of gone, but they've been talked about being kind of gone with the God's Reign, which is a newer thing. Yeah, we'll get into all of it. There's a lot of mess that goes on in association with this entire thing that isn't necessarily updated, but it's also one of those things is I would like these things to be distinguished a little bit better when we research them. Unfortunately, when you research Osirion, you get a lot of modern Osirion and not the old empire. They're named the same thing, and technically could trace their history back together, but they really should be considered separate for reasons, like the Osirian Empire versus Osirion today. Anyway, let's head to the Land of Pharaohs and its old history. And this will rehash some of the things I talked about in my Osirion video. We're going to kind of dive a little deeper in a lot of ways. That's the kind of point today. I'm going to be trying to show the Empire, old Osirion side of things that basically helped build Northern Garund after Earthfall. The fact is that this was a powerful empire that was one of the largest in the Inner Sea region after Earthfall. It had a lot of ancient advanced structures, technologies, epic conquests. The pharaohs of ancient Osirion are basically written in history books for various regions. And they basically conquered or obliterated their neighbors, the Jiskin Imperium, the Thracian League. The other major empires that survived during this period fell to them. For various reasons, they fell then eventually, but still, they were a dominant force. And a lot of the things they built, a lot of the stuff that's left over still remains today. Even their ancient mummies sometimes still raise, and curses still exist, and there's treasures to be found beneath the sand. And this is Nethys here. He's going to be really important to this entire story. So we begin at the beginning. And the beginning... Well, no, that was not the mummy. This is Nethys, sorry. Kind of mixed up in my brain there. That's one of the pharaohs. This is Nethys. We have to start at the beginning and the origin of Osirion, and then we can talk about the first stage of Osirion. These are two major points. So, Osirion as an ancient empire, as the original version of it, existed about 8,000 years ago in the current timeline of Golarion. The exact date of founding is estimated to be about at negative 3470 AR. We have this man, Agazhad. Agazhad is a very important figure, as he will eventually be known as a very powerful worshipper of Nethys, But this is also about the same time that Nethys ascended to godhood, so it's a little complex in the timeline here. But basically, exact what happened is kind of a no. Agazad, though, was basically this pawn under a man named Nethys, a man that came from the west. So, Agazad knew to trust, or at least fear and respect, this man named Nethys, who had a little bit of a violet hue to his skin. His eyes were seemingly made of solid gold. He lacked pupils and an iris. He bore riches to basically this early tribal leader that this man Agazan could scarcely fathom, and understood divine arcane might. Didn't really ask where the stranger, and even when he asked where the stranger came from, only cryptic riddles came about that. But Nethys only said, "Your god and your king." That was basically the only answer he gave. And again, Nethys is tied to Ancient Osirion and seems to be Ancient Osirian. Where his powers came from, his ascension to godhood, there's a lot of questions that we'll have to look at Nethys as a figure on his own. I'll do a video on him. I have to do a video on probably most of the main deities at this point in time. That's pretty cool to do. That may be a series that we'll do eventually. Anyway, a lot of magical powers and knowledge were given to Agazad, and he basically followed Nethys. Nethys commanded him to keep his identity a secret from his comrades and instructed him basically a way to unite the tribes in his territory. With his help, he rose to this power. And then when Olirant, the spawn of Rovagog, came up and threatened to destroy the region, basically Agazan was able to channel the power of Nethys, unite the people under him, and defeat this terrifying beast, and unite his tribes under this banner. And this is where the founding city of Sothis, which exists today, came about, in Olirant's shell. Because Olirant is kind of dead, but not actually dead. The spawns of Rovagog are really hard to kill. He's sealed away, basically, and kind of murdered through Nethys' help and Agazad's strength. So there was a little bit of secret intervention by a godling / god at this point in time. And Agazad relied on Nethys in a lot of ways. But Sothis became self-sustaining. It grew into this fledgling empire. Agazad grew old. Basically, he found that Nethys had left him. Left him because he didn't need him anymore. And Nethys had risen to true divinity in this time. Became the god of magic. Again, he was kind of divine, sort of, or just powerful, but we know by the end of Agazad's life, he was truly a god. And the temple to the all-seeing eye, to Nethys, was made during this time period. And this beginning of the temple, end of Agazad, founding of Sothis, is where we get Osirion and its first age. Empire, the kingdom, has risen. So Nethys, at first, tried to keep a hand in Osirion. Proved to be a mistake. A woman, only known as the Nagafara, the successor to Agazad, the queen that was in there in power about 3412, negative 3412 AR. Well, his power kind of didn't help her. She got violent visions, nightmares, prophecies, kind of went a little crazy, destroyed the Nethian temple, basically set fire to it because of her visions. Didn't go well. So Nethys was like, I tried to influence that lady and she kind of went crazy. That's probably bad. All right, a little bit more hands off. You guys, do your best. Which is probably for the best, a little less godly intervention in the country he found. So yeah. Anyway, temple got rebuilt, and there was basically a glorious spire to the nation's founder, Agazad the First, was put up, basically cementing his place, kind of erasing his successor's destructive things. You know, we kind of get rid of it. And then we get a number of pharaohs kind of ruling over Sothis for some time, building up the territory there, getting their own tombs, basically the Great Marks, the Titanic Pyramids, the monolithic spires, the underground crypts. All these things were being developed during this time period. There were rivals during this time period also. And there was battles between these mighty god kings, the pharaohs as they were. And of course, the pantheon that they worshipped under Nethys was there. Talk about the pantheon. Anyway, we finally get to the Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues, who basically, with some necromantic advisors, the Suji and the Araman, Lord of Divs, basically brought low the Jiskin Imperium. They're basically rival to the west, bringing their nation to the knee, destroying them, conquering that territory. Then the Song Pharaoh basically got rid of the Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues, banishing the Araman from the material plane, confined his cultists and the Suji to the desert. You know, it was kind of like the successor to the Pharaoh of Forgotten Plagues was kind of like, you know, you kind of went a little bit far to destroy your enemies. Please go away. And so under the Song Pharaoh, yes, we have this new territory, we have this new power, we don't longer have the rivals. We have reached the kind of high point of the First Age. The Shimensek city was founded. There was a boon in technology, cultural milestones, the territory grew. And this was basically, at this point in time, the Terraconan League became more of a subsidiary to Osirion. They weren't conquered. They were more like, hey, you're like a person under us because you helped us out, so we kind of conquered you but didn't. And they spanned pretty far west, getting large fortresses and cities. A lot of domains that were formed during this time period. This didn't last. Song Pharaoh was assassinated in negative 2999 AR by her successor, Jetri I. And so the prosperity on the Song Pharaoh, the growth that was there, ended. Jetri was succeeded by a bunch of pharaohs who sucked. They were gluttons, they had terrible advisors, the empire declined. Jetri V, who reigned from negative 2885 to negative 2866, basically raided the old emperor's tombs for treasure and gold, pillaged jewelries, threw the corpses on massive pyres, the mummified bodies in Sothis. Yeah, a lot of the entire, like, horrible mummies coming back from the dead to, like, punish those that would defile them, kind of, they think about comes from this, you know, this massive spiritual thing of, like, disturbing the bodies, raiding the tombs, and doing horrible things to your successors. Yeah, kind of created the entire problem that exists today in Osirion. That's what people think. Whether it's true or not, it could be part of it. But anyway, Jetri's fifth end came kind of swiftly, mutilated, his body bound to Agazad's spire in Sothis the next morning, and people were like, yeah, that's to be expected. Jetri's eldest son took the throne, and Jetri VI was a little less arrogant, a little less terrible, not a great rule, but a little better. Anyway, 1,000 years goes by. Things don't get better. I mean, with the angry spirits and undead mummies now, like, preventing a lot of, like, bad things, as the worst things from happening, there wasn't a lot of, like, great things or bad things. It was just basically, like, slowly rotting away at this point in time. But there was a shift. Shifting from thoughts of life to after death. This entire thing of the pharaohs kind of carrying what's in their tombs, messages to the psychopomps that would come to collect their souls, their buried chambers with their great wealths, their mark on the society there. So yeah, there was the, like, infamous pharaoh Anhupsis the 11th, who basically maintained his throne via lichdom for nearly 4 centuries that came in during this time period. Yeah, this is when the most decadence came about, most unstable. Yeah, so this entire obsession with after death, someone became a lich and ruled. So, yeah. 15 centuries after the founding. Actually, 15 centuries prior, by the 15th century prior to the founding of Absalom, things weren't great. Basically, there were 4 dynasties that existed, and each one was going to was vying for rulership of the empire at this point in time. So civil war was on the agenda. this is the kind of marker of the Second Age. We have these four forces all vying for control. Things look bad. Very bad. And there's some Osirian deities. Again, we will talk about, because some still exist and some are gone and they're a mess, but we'll talk about them. Because they're important to this entire thing too. Because they're there, and it also came from Earth. Because Earth exists in Golarion, and these are actually the Egyptian deities. They abandoned Egypt, came here. It's a thing. Anyway, with this, the people in charge of these four deities dynasties struck a deal. And this was in negative 1498. So we are now well over 1,500 years later. So this was after Jetrees the First's betrayal. This is like 2,000 years of Osirion. Basically, these four made a pact to become the four pharaohs of Ascension. That if one should betray the other, basically they would found a downfall for all of them. Under these four, Hepshu, the Fiend Pharaoh, Ankana, the Radiant Pharaoh, Anak Pharaoh, the Cerulean Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh of Numbers, whose true name has been lost to time, basically rose the new Sate and began the Second Age, the Age of the Black Sphinx. They accomplished a lot. They constructed Tutman, which became the new capital. They basically destroyed and assimilated the Tarakian League, finally, who had been a vassal for so many centuries, basically was absorbed into them, and ruled pretty righteously and decently for about 70 years. In negative 1431, they brought their downfall and end of the Age of the Black Sphinxes, and it became decline. Basically, this was a Second Age where they built things back up pretty heavily, repaired the empire in 70 years in a lot of ways, brought things to low, got to their biggest territory, and it was gone. Sothis became the new place. Tutman was actually abandoned. The conquered lands of the Tarakian League fell to barbarism, basically, after another pharaoh basically failed to replace the governor of the region in negative 841. So that area entire kind of fell apart, allowing what nation would be there now to form out of the city-states which broke apart out of there. And, Osirian succumbed to its own wastefulness. And then we finally get, after another 3,000 years of whimpering, neglect, falling, Quadrian operatives kind of move in there and basically see as an opportunity to instill Osirian as part of the Kelish Empire. They infiltrated it, overthrew Farron, Mendez, the 26th, and yeah. And Osirian basically ended. Osirian was now a puppet state, a member of the Kelish Empire, technically under Quadrian. Quadrian. I never say that right. Quadrian. And it lasted this way for about 3,000 years until its new Third Age, where it becomes modern Osirian and basically separates it out. So, yeah. 3,000 years of not being its own country. This is kind of why I keep them separate in the timeline. It was 3,000 years of being under the heel of another empire. It's a long time. Granted, it had a long time of being an independent empire. 5,000 years. Semi-interrupted rule of the great Osirian Empire, the great ancient Osirian group. And it fell, but it was never great. They rose to some great heights and fell very quickly. Here is their greatest territory. Now, this territory marks the basically height of the Second Age. This is when the four pharaohs of Ascension, the territory they carved out. This is before the successors of the four pharaohs had things kind of fall apart. You can see the size of Ancient Osirion, how big it was. While the country is in the corner right below me now, this small area, it spread across all of northern Garund. Now this territory would shrink in the next 3,000 years greatly. You have to think about this entire, like, middle area over here where, you know, the Jisk-Imperium and Terrakian League and all the things would disappear. These territories were all Jiska, Terrakion. They held them all. They'd eventually be gone. But this was a big territory they had, and there's a lot of ancient ruins and places there. Hey, cough, 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 cough. Hello. Oh, great ancient cities that once existed here and are now nothing. I mean, we saw, like, a capital being founded and then being lost. Thuman. Sorry, Thuman, you are not well treated. Yeah. This kind of links us back to this. This is the, of course, symbol for modern Osirion as it is. And it does mark off to their past in a lot of ways. The sheer fact is that there is a lot left over in that region that is ancient. You have to think about it. It was, of the 8,000 years, 5,000 of them, that many great things were built. The First Age was filled with grand wonders. Great pyramids, ancient structures. I mean, Thuman is a place eaten by the desert in a lot of ways. A ruin that still can be found today. But its abandonment and destruction and eaten by the desert shows a lot of what happened here. That is a lot of what's been happening. And again, 3,000 years of control is a lot. Osirian legacy is a mess. Its deities are a mess. With the death of Gorum, Nethys and Thought battled for power. Nethys won. A bunch of other deities basically got caught up in a hag's witch ritual and disappeared then. So many of the major gods of the Osirian pantheon, aka the Egyptian pantheon, are gone. The prayers are now unanswered. Are they completely gone? I don't know. We don't know for sure. We know stuff that happens with the gods' reign, but that's also a marker of, you know, this entire thing, because Nethys was an important part about this. Nethys basically was part of the family tree connected with Osiris, Set, Neth, Isis. Ra was there too, but that's an entirely different thing. You know, this is an entire thing of connections that happened in Ancient Osirion, and Nethys is a deity that rose to power and basically probably, honestly, may have worshipped or been connected to in some way the Egyptian deities when they came into Osirion. I am fascinated because Nethys is still there, and kind of, there's so much going on that is a mess, but that's also part of the legacy. That's a part of all that's going on here. Because the establishment of these deities, the worship of them on, is deeply connected to Ancient Osirion. Their worship was mostly lost under Quadrian rule. Kind of came back to power once they were gone, but now is gone again because of the gods' reign. So what does this mean for so much of the ancient powers that lie in Osirion, the ancient powers that are left over from Ancient Osirion? So many of their tombs have been robbed. Others are not. Basically, with so much time period and so much of the desert, so much is lost there. So much has been destroyed there. So much history is this mixed bag of, like, hundreds of pharaohs. The fact is, we probably know a good chunk of the pharaohs, but there's just so many pharaohs that have ruled over Osirion in time that we don't know all of them. We know some of them by titles, we know others we do not know. It is a true mess of rulers over Osirion. A true mess of them. There's so much. And I could probably dive into some of these figures on their own. Agazot, some of these other pharaohs. Some things like the Pharaohs of the Forgotten Plagues. I mean, there's an entire story to tell there. Maybe not as big of a story as things, but like, you could honestly dive into some of these figures on their own because there's so much of a story about them, because we know so much about them, because the history is so in-depth. That, and again, modern Osirion is the legacy of Ancient Osirion. It reflects in a lot of ways how we look at Egypt today. Egypt today is not ancient Egypt, but it holds the legacy of that in a lot of ways. On the other hand, Osirion and Golarion is a little different. Yes, part of Osirion wants to trace its way back to Old Empire. They've embraced Old Osirion in a lot of ways. And it never truly fell the same way that maybe Egypt did. Yes, conquest, changes. It was a puppet state of Quadria and Capatesh for so many years, for 3,000 years. But being that puppet state means it had a chance to reawaken, to change, become something, to become what it is today, which is in a lot of ways a successor to Old Osirion, but also not. Modern day Osirion has a lot of that elements of it. But I think what's important to think about now is they've learned lessons from their predecessor, from their time basically being controlled for 3,000 years, and from that 5,000 years of history that some of it's lost, but they have a lot of it. 5,000 years of Ancient Osirion is impressive, as especially as many of the ancient empires in Golarion go. Some of them lasted for that long, but many of those ones that last that long, we don't know enough about. They are gone, destroyed. Ancient Osirion, there's a lot left. As much as there was a lot lost under Quadria, much was saved. And I think that's an important part about it, is there is so much still left over that perhaps of all the ancient empires that existed on Golarion, this is the one we might know the most about. That we have much of its legacy remaining, much of its influence remaining. It and its existence is important. It is a key aspect of so much of the region, so much of northern Garund. And learning about it and understanding it a little bit more is important. I hope you enjoyed diving. Please check out the rest of my stuff. Join me live on Twitch. See more of my stuff over on YouTube. If you're over on Twitch, there's some gaming, tabletop recordings, other stuff, live plays, discussing tabletop Saturdays at 6. A lot of stuff over there. Make sure to check me out. But hey, I know most of you are on the YouTube side. Do remember, as I said at the beginning, do the algorithm stuffs. Make sure you subscribe and let me know what you think of this. Anyway, check out my social media for updates on schedules, what's going on with me. Discord's the best for all that. And I'm going to head out now. So next time we explore the past of Golarion, some of its people, places, other things like this, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.